In this video, we're introducing you to the Ghost scale, which is a scale we've been using for the last few months. Welcome. My name is Patrick Rolfe, and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we want to introduce a scale that we are going to compare with a Kaya, and this is in no way to say that Kaya scales are not great, because they are. That's still the scale that we use, for example, here in the store. But out of the World Brewers Cup in Milan last year, we visited a bunch of different competitors and kind of looked at their setups, and it's one of the kind of interesting parts of being backstage in those competitions. And one of the competitors, Ply, which is also the person that gave us the plastic origami, which we've done a video about, he used what I thought to be a very interesting scale. So needless to say, I ended up buying a bunch of those scales, and I've been testing them ever since. And I think at this point, they're good enough for the value to actually introduce to you guys, because I know that a Kaya for a lot of people comes at a very high cost, right? Not saying it's not worth the cost. There's some interesting, really cool gadgets with the Kayas that are great. And it's kind of become the industry standard for a lot of coffee shops. But being at home, perhaps you want something that performs just as well in a slightly different price range that are kind of interesting. Which brings us to this. So the brand is Cafede Kona. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation as per usual, but it's basically a brand coming out of Shanghai, or at least the product is produced in Shanghai. And they have a few different products. If you look up on them online, it's kind of hard to find an official website. I bought my scales through AliExpress. I've seen lately there's been a few available on Amazon as well, but still probably recommend AliExpress. The fact is that they cost about half, if not less, from what a Kaya scale does. And what we want to do in this video is just basically kind of compare them. And first of all, there's one really cool thing, which is what got me into this in the first place. And it's the fact that when you compete, you have a little bit of a challenge sometimes in terms of explaining what you're doing to the head judge. So you actually have a judge watching you pour water on the coffee, taking notes, making sure that all of those pours are 100% equal. And that comes in terms of both time and also in terms of course, the amount of water you're brewing on the coffee, right? Or pouring on the coffee. But this little scale actually has what they call a dual screen. So if you hold in the chair button for about 3 seconds, you're actually going to see the exact same numbers on the opposite side. So if you are, for example, in an educational environment, you want to show someone how you brew coffee, or you're in a competition, it's really useful, because then the person standing or sitting on the other side can actually see your exact numbers, which is what kind of got me into it in the first place. Secondly, which I think is interesting, is a little bit smaller, both thinner, but also just not as wide as, for example, a Kaya are. I always thought that Kayas are quite chunky, big scales, which makes sense because that's kind of what's required in order to make a really accurate scale, right? So not necessarily a critique, but I don't mind a smaller scale that is kind of easier to bring with me, a little bit more portable, and then also doesn't just take up so much space, more or less. So that's one of the cool things that we see. Apart from that, what's kind of the challenge with other scales that have been coming up trying to rival the Kaya scale is that a lot of the scales actually doesn't read too well. So the numbers you see are actually not as accurate as you want them to be, or as fast as you want them to be. Which when you competing, if you have a little bit of a delay, like for example the Hario scales has, then that's a little bit of a challenge, right? You don't want that. You want to be able to see very much in real time how much water you're pouring on the coffee. And you can actually do that with this scale, which is also really cool. And I think it's very much competition standard in the sense that I would be happy to bring this scale and compete with in my next competition, for example, right? Which should make it more than fine to use, for example, at home when you're brewing coffee. So it's a really interesting one. Again, it comes at a lower price range, which also means you don't have a fancy app system, which, to be fair, on the Akaya side is a really cool thing to have. So there's definitely a few things that you don't have here, which the Akaya would have. But in general, when it comes to just brewing a cup of coffee, it's a great scale, right? Now, one of the things it's referencing also in the description is that it will not be as accurate if you go up and you brew very large brews, so you have very heavy equipment on it, right? So this scale basically takes up to 3 kilos. One of the cool things is that the timer actually keeps on going up until 60 minutes. Not really sure why you would ever use that, but it's kind of interesting when you do cuppings and so on to have a timer that actually goes for longer than what the Akaya does. So, I mean, there's a few things that could definitely be better. It's not super easy to turn on and off, or at least it's not as satisfying as if you use an Akaya, right? So it takes a little bit longer. It doesn't feel quite as intuitive. It's a little bit the difference between, for example, Apple versus Android. But what's interesting here is that it actually is a perfectly good scale, and I'm happy to use it myself. We're all happy to use it here, so we kind of thought it worth just introducing it to you guys, and also asking you what is your favorite scale, what do you like to use, and if you are looking for a scale that is a very good scale, by all means, and costs a little bit less than the Akaya, then we would definitely recommend this. Again, we have no connections whatsoever to the people that actually produce this. I've actually tried to reach out because I have a few questions for them, but never got any reply. But if you want to buy it, you can buy it through Ali. Relatively fast shipping as well, which I thought was pretty cool. It's an interesting scale. It's a cheaper option, and it performs just as good for home use as any other scale on the market would do. So with that, we want to thank you for watching. We're going to take this conversation again over on Patreon. That's where we get really nerdy about things. We also invite you to comments on, what's your favorite scale? It's kind of interesting to know. Are we all using Akaya scales? Or is there any other scale that you prefer using as well? So with that, we want to say thank you for watching and have a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.